Hey, welcome back. In this story, I share all about my first 18 hours at sea. From the south of France in the Cote or the French Riviera where we're based, all the way down to Sardinia, Italy. As I arrived in France from South Africa, fresh off my flight, even though I had no experience in this particular kind of work as a stewardess on a yacht, I arrived here with life experience and I guess a heart full of courage and bravery, and I figured that should count for something, right? I boarded this beautiful catamaran, and the very next day we set sail for Sardinia, Italy. We'd headed out down the west coast of Corsica, and then we were going to go through the Strait of Bonifacio, which is the strait between Corsica and Sardinia. Somewhere in the background throughout this arrival experience, there was a niggly feeling about how I'd cope with a long sail and being on water for the next few months. I'd spent most of my life in corporate, and the truth is I'm an earth child. I always loved being out in the mountains, hiking. I'd done that for most of my life. And so suddenly being on water was something brand new for me. But the moment we cast off the lines and headed out the port and got into the open water, it made me think of this fact that about 60% of our body weight comprises water. It's in our organs, in our blood, our bones, our brains. It all carries an element of water in it. And it's funny, but I started almost feeling this reservoir of water in my body move in harmony with the sea's movement. And I realized that I was actually going to be just fine. I suppose in addition, I needed to get used to the sounds of the yacht, the sounds of the waves bashing up against the hull, the mast and the rigging creaking, and the feeling of, pitching and rolling on the water. All of that was my body acclimating to my new environment. And so with that comfortable feeling for me, there was sort of a level of confidence growing. But that confidence was somewhat short-lived, because just a few hours in, about 8 hours into our sail, around midnight, it was my turn to come on watch. Being on watch is when every member of the crew gets a turn to sit on the bridge while the yacht's going along its course towards its destination. But just like being on the road, you still have to look out for other traffic on the road. You're basically taking care of the boat's safe navigation while you're underway, making sure you're avoiding collision with other vessels or any other thing floating out in the water at all costs. So you're doing this, according to the Colrig's rule, by using eyesight and any other equipment you have on board that supports your awareness of what's going on, as well as hearing, using the VHF radio system to tune into the communications that are being shared across all marine vessels in the area so that you can hear what to be aware of, etc. But as a first timer doing this, it is quite unnerving. So as it was coming up to my turn to be on watch, I asked my husband if he'd come and sit on the bridge with me. And of course, he'd already intended this. He's a really conscientious captain. So just a little bit on his CV, actually. So he'd been sailing since he was 12. His dad had a yacht, and he took him out sailing nearly 5 or 6 nights of the week. They went out sailing together. And then around the age of 20, he became a certified South African ocean master. which then led him to delivering yachts around the world. He did about 18 ocean crossings. And in that process, he racked up through these years, in total now, around 260,000 nautical sailing miles. And in that is the depth of experience and knowledge. And interestingly, after his Ocean Master certification, he actually taught sailing for a few years. So that CV speaks to his depth of knowledge, his experience, and obviously I felt very safe being with him. So he came to sit on the bridge with me, but he said to me, I'm going to doze off and fall asleep because he needs to rest in between. But he'd be there and he's just like right next to me. I could tap him awake if I was uncertain about anything. And so I felt more reassured. And then just before he dozed off, he said to me, I have one rule when I'm at sea. And the rule is this: if you think you should do something, you should have done it 20 minutes ago already, because conditions at sea change very quickly. So anytime you need to wake me, you wake me. It was meant to be reassuring, but suddenly it made me feel, oh my word, this is a great responsibility, which it is. But he was there and I got on with my shift, and it wasn't long before he was snoring lightly next to me. But there's something really interesting that happens when it's you in this big open vast space, the dark night, stars in the sky, and all these vessels out there with lights communicating something. There's a whole lot of signals coming your way, and it means becoming really settled in the experience. Now, I wasn't initially settled, admittedly. There's this feeling of, am I doing the right thing? But it requires a deep trust. You just have to remember what you were taught, apply it, and test everything. Look around, you take in the information, read the experience. And of course I had the backup that if I doubted anything, I could wake my husband at any time. I did wake him a few times. And every time I woke him, he woke up without an issue, helped me assess, asked me what my decision was. I told him. He either corrected me or assured me that I'd made the right call, and then went back to sleep. So it was really beautiful, this experience of being on watch for the first time. So his turn to be on watch was directly after me. I went to make him a cup of coffee and then woke him. And then I crept under the covers, the duvet he'd brought up with him, to sleep on the bridge. A few hours later, I think it was the light actually woke me, and the sound of this beautiful yacht just gliding through the water. As I opened my eyes, there was my husband sitting in his happy place at the wheel. And this pink dawn just drawing my attention, kind of looking out over this seascape around me. And something dawned on me. This beautiful thing I'd read, which said, decisions are portals. And I could see how every decision I'd made in my life leading up to this point, every past experience where I'd made a decision that led to something, and that something led to something else. There's a cause, and then it has an effect. Everything had led me to that moment. And as I took that in, I felt very grateful for everything in my life that had a role to play. If you think about your own life, every decision you made led you to the next thing, that led you to the next thing, that led to where you are right now. And often I think, we don't like taking responsibility for where we are at in life, but we were part of the decision. I know with myself, I tend to be okay with taking responsibility for the so-called not good decisions I've made in my life. I can own up to stuff. But often I don't acknowledge when I've made decisions that led to something beautiful, something magnificent. I tend to defer those. I could possibly not have been involved in making something beautiful happen in my life. And I've started since taking responsibility. I started saying, yeah, man, I was there. I chose that for myself. And in that way, I can create beautiful things in my life too. And something else came up, which was this message I received at a retreat I'd gone to. And this beautiful teacher, Mama Leanne, had said, you have to give up something to receive the gift. And as I looked around me on that particular morning, arriving in Sardinia, Italy, I realized I gave up some things to arrive in this moment, but there was a gift in it. Here I was with my husband, starting to do a sailing season with him. Long story there. I love going into coaching mode. And if you haven't worked that out yet, yeah, there is always a message in all of these videos that I share, because that is part of my storytelling as an encouragement to always take a look and see if something pings for you. We'd headed out down the west coast of Corsica, through the strait between Corsica and Sardinia. And in that strait, there's a beautiful archipelago of islands called La Maddalena, and it's made up of 7 main large islands and about 55 smaller islands. So we made our way through this archipelago of islands to arrive at northern Sardinia. It's called the Costa Smeralda, and its meaning is the Emerald Coast. And it's because the waters there are this beautiful green, turquoise, emerald color. Once we dropped anchor, we got to do our little bits and pieces of work in the meanwhile, and then we swapped shifts. And so we prepared ourselves for the rest of that day. And then around midday the next day, we headed to our first port, where we're going to spend our 2 weeks with our first set of guests. And in my next video, I'm going to share the rest of what the whole season was like. It's going to be a little bit like a travel vlog, I suppose. I'm going to share a little bit about our 2 weeks in Sardinia, the gorgeous places we went to, all the different ports, 3 or 4 trips out to Tropez, most divine foods and pastry delicacies and breads. I don't know how I didn't gain 20 kilograms. Trips to the islands, out to Antibes, and that sort of thing. So I'm going to share more about that, and it's coming up in the next video, and I hope you'll stay for that one. Big love as always. See you next time.